Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and on today's episode, we are going to do a deep dive into robotic milking with John Gerbitz. John is the owner of Cow Corner Consulting, based out of Wisconsin, where he helps dairy farmers do a better job with managing their single box robot units in their barns. Now, as a robotic dairy milking farm owner myself, I really enjoyed this conversation talking about some of the details of managing a robotic dairy, as well as some of the philosophies that go behind it. So if you're interested at all in robotics, in dairy farming, I think this will be a great episode for you to listen to. So stay tuned for my interview with John Gerbitz. Well, today on the podcast, we have John Gerbitz from Wisconsin with us here today to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is robotic milking. And John has experience in that because he is a consultant around robotic milking for farms all over the Midwest. And we're going to be talking about that topic here today. So welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start out with a little bit of background on you. You've worked for a equipment dealer or equipment manufacturer around robotic milking before you went off on your own to start your consulting business. So give us a little background on your experience there and why you decided to go out on your own to help with consulting.
Sure. So my interest in robotic milking really started while I was working for the manufacturer, which was DeLaval, and I worked in a customer support role. So working through dealers to help farmers figure out what problems with their software, ways to make cows flow better, just making the equipment work better. But I felt a little bit like maybe I was a pigeon consultant in that role. By a pigeon consultant, I mean I would fly in and make a mess all over everything, and you might never see me again. And so I wanted to be more directly involved, more hands-on, more able to, if we changed a setting that needed to be changed in steps over time, to be able to make sure that those steps were completed and then be able to follow up on the results of the recommendations that I made. So with Cow Corner, I've been able to do that with the core of my business's subscription customers, and I'm logging into those farms remotely once a week and visiting the farms once a month, and so much more able to learn from the things that we do on the farm and help customers be more responsive.
Awesome. And with robotic milking, are there different sets of principles that you really look at versus milking in a parlor?
I think the same basics apply. We need to have good cow comfort. We need to have transition management, repro management, and quality forages. That, to me, is the basis of making everything work. But each of those is more sensitive in robotic milking. We need quality forages that move through the cow quickly so she gets hungry and comes back to the robot. We need good repro management because late lactation cows don't like to come to the robot anymore. Cow comfort so that the cow lies down, gets a good rest, and is ready to come back up again. So my point, I tie a lot of this back to the basics that have that work in every dairy operation, but for some reasons they become more important. And so when I'm tracking cow performance, I think it's important to look by lactation group and by stage of lactation. As we change parameters like milking permissions and feeding over the course of the lactation, we need to see how those are affecting cows in different stages of lactation. So I'm looking at how many times she comes to the robot, how much milk she's making, how much she's supposed to be eating, and how much she actually is eating by stage of lactation in my analysis.
Okay. Where do you see milking robots actually fitting on farms? Are there certain farms where you would say that's probably not the right fit for milking robots, or certain types of farm managers that might not necessarily fit with robots, or are robots for everybody?
No, I think I'm not sharing anything new here when I say that robotic milking is for people who want to do more with their cows and manage their cows in a different way. And for those who want to be able to walk away from the barn and spend more time in the field, it can give us more flexibility in our time. But for people who are no longer interested in cows and want something else to take care of the cows, probably better off to hire somebody to do that rather than to get robots. For those who maybe want a little more flexibility with their time, but also want want to manage cows in a different way, robots are a good fit.
As we're talking about robots, most of your experience has been around single box unit robots, not rotary parlors, robotic rotary parlors, and those type of things, correct?
Correct. And we've got the robotic rotaries, and now the batch milking is gaining some interest. And there's nothing wrong with those technologies. It's just not my area of interest. And I think when we look at those are technologies that allow us to continue managing cows the way we have, where we take cows out of the pen and bring them to the robot. And again, they work, and for some people, the strength may be that we can continue doing things the way we've done, taking cows out of the pen. But for me, the single box in the pen where the cow comes to the robot voluntarily gives us some different opportunities in cow management. So that's where I'm focused.
Okay. So let's start out by talking about barn layout, because that's very critical to single box robots, right?
Yes.
So with that, what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen in barn design, and what are some principles that you believe every operation should follow as they're looking at laying out their barn?
I'm going to start by saying that most often when I begin to work with a farm, the barn layout is already done. I've had some opportunities to work with people who are deciding what they want to do and a little bit in that direction. So I'm more often dealing with what's already there than getting to choose what it's going to look like. And I have to say, I've seen some things that I really thought wouldn't work. I've seen some retrofits where robots were put in the old holding area and not in sight of the cows, and where cows actually had a little ways to go to get to the robots, and that worked. And then I've seen some other situations that I thought maybe wouldn't work that did.
I think one interesting thing to just maybe discuss, and you probably have experience on both sides of it, is what's the difference between free flow barns and forced flow barns, and some of the management practices around that.
So I think when we talk about free flow versus guided flow, so much of the discussion in the past has been which is better. And first of all, I want to start this comparison with it isn't which is better. It's which is better for the individual's management style, for the facility that they already have, if we're trying to retrofit something. So it's not which is better, it's which works best for the customer. And I think the things that we need to look at in deciding between the two, it really starts at the feed bunk, which so much of robotic milking does. And are you in a position, are you willing and able to take some energy out of the bunk and put it in the robot to draw cows to the robot? If yes, then free flow can work well for you. If the answer is no, then you ought to be looking at guided flow. To me, there's lots of other questions that come into it, but that's where it starts. And when I say willing and able to take energy out of the PMR, there are situations, if you're in the Midwest with high quality BMR corn silage and top quality alfalfa haylage, you'll almost have to put straw in order to reduce the forages are high enough quality that it becomes difficult. There's also, are you willing to spend the money to put pellets in the robot. And so then when we look at the opportunities that they give us, I think on the guided flow side, the latest opportunities we're looking at are completely taking pellets out on the extreme or reducing the amount of pellet that we're feeding. Gives us the opportunity to be a little more consistent in how we feed the cow. If all the cows are getting everything from the PMR as we did in parlor situations, we don't have to worry about the inconsistency that may come with some cows that like pellets and some cows that don't. On the other hand, the opportunity to precision feed cows and to provide that extra for early lactation cows. And we talk a lot about the cost of the pellet going in and what it costs us to feed pellets in early lactation. One side of that equation that we don't always talk about is what we don't have to feed to late lactation cows. So if I've got a one group TMR in a parlor and late lactation cows are getting the same thing that early lactation cows are getting, there's a risk of those cows getting fat. And there are ingredients that those cows don't need that we're spending money on. And so while we focus on what we're spending up front to feed those cows in a free flow situation, we kind of forget about the fact that we're also spending less to feed late lactation cows as we're feeding them a less dense PMR and also being able to cut back on the pellets.
For me, as a smaller farm, we're milking, 250 cows here on robots. It gives me the flexibility in that situation to manage my cows like you would on a 2,000 cow dairy, where you can have a low group that you feed differently than a high group. So that's I do see flexibility in that from that standpoint. But I also look at a lot of benchmarks from around the country on robot dairies, and I see a lot of the top performing profitable farms are the guided flow systems. So that was one thing that's intrigued me is how those guys in the guided flow side of things are really driving a lot of profit without feeding much for pellet.
Yeah, I think they're feeding very much like high producing parlor farms are. And I think one of the things that I've discovered in this area is whether it's free flow or guided flow, the more uniform your group is, the better you can feed them. In a free flow barn, if I have if the difference between the smaller the difference between the higher producing cows and the lowest producing cows in the group, the higher I can set the nutrient level in my PMR. So if the cows range from 90 to 130 or 140 pounds, then I can set the bunk at a higher level and get more from the forages. Whereas if the cows range from 140 to 60 or 50 pounds, then I need to set that bunk lower. And so it helps to have a more uniform group of cows. And so on these really high producing cows or really high producing herds, in guided flow, its persistency in lactation is doing everything else right, so that there are fewer low producing cows in the group, if that makes sense.
So speaking about profitability on the farms, most people talk about, we're going to put robots in because we want to save on labor. But a lot of times that's not necessarily where the biggest profit driver is when an operation really sits down and looks at their numbers and analyzes them, a year or two after they put robots in. So where are some of the areas that you've seen farms be able to drive more profit outside of just savings on labor?
I think, first of all, you're absolutely right that I think most people look at robots for labor. But I think moving in, they find different things that are good about labor. So anecdotally, I've talked to customers who feel that longevity is better. One producer told me he was getting an extra half of a lactation in his. So this was a producer that has a parlor and a robot barn, and the robot cows are robot cows, and the parlor cows are parlor cows, and he was seeing an extra half a lactation. So greater longevity. as a factor. We can see higher production in robot barns, but I think that can is the operative word there. And if you're already at 105 pounds per cow and you think you're going to go to 115 because you put robots in, we maybe need to do some math on that and figure where that's going to come from. I have seen it happen, though, and we need to think, too, about what's the impact of the barn. And so oftentimes when we're putting in robots, we're putting in a new barn and how much the increased production comes from there. But I've worked with herds and even in retrofit situations where it's a good herd of cows and they just don't have the opportunity to express their full genetic potential, and they move in and they go up 10 pounds of milk. Those are really fun to work with, and the milking frequency, the ability to manage cows. One of the things we don't think about, Jim Salfer made this point at a workshop I attended a month or so ago, is the flexibility that gives your time may allow you to do other things more effectively. So if producing quality forages is a struggle because your labor supply requires that late in the afternoon you need to be in the barn, if it allows us to produce better quality forages to get field work done in a more timely manner in some situations, that can be a real profit driver as well.
Yeah, because as you said earlier, usually it boils down to the quality of the feed, especially in a robot barn. Yeah, I know one of the things for me that I wasn't even really putting into my financials when I was looking at putting robots in was the vast increase in our reproduction performance. Not going basically from a parlor that didn't have anything. I didn't have any herd monitoring system. I didn't have any repro monitoring or activity system, and then getting all that technology all at once, and being able to put all those data points together to make a good decision on when a cow is in heat and when to breed her. And our performance on our preg rates over doubled in the first 6 months of having robots. So that right there really changed things for us with days in milk, for things like call rates, those type of things really changed because we were doing much better with reproductive performance. And that was one thing we weren't even really budgeting on.
That's a fast improvement. Yeah. Excellent.
So what are some of the big pitfalls that you've seen in management with robots? Maybe somebody just feels like they hit a wall in their performance. They just can't drive the performance that they're looking to get. What are usually things that you're looking at to try to figure out how to help with improving that?
When I started my business, I thought a lot of my time was going to be spent at the computer and adjusting settings and finding things that weren't working right there. And as I got to spend more time on farms, it really is broken down to a couple of things that I see in the barn. Number one is bunk management. Anytime a cow comes to the bunk, she is able to get a good meal efficiently. So we talk about different numbers as far as how much refusal, how many times you have to push up. There are some good guidelines out there, but for me, the guideline is at any time of day, is there a pile of feed that the cow can stick her nose in and get her belly full quickly? And I don't believe that pellets get cows out of the stall. I believe that forage moves through and she's getting out of the stall because she's hungry, and probably knowing that there's something at the bunk is a big key. And I've visited farms that have long periods of time where there is not feed in the bunk, and to coach through that to have more feed available. In parlors, we focus on this just from a dry matter intake standpoint, but here from a cow behavior standpoint. And I think the time that we lose, either with inconsistent feeding or with times that feed isn't available, could be inconsistent, could be too focused on having the cows clean up the bunk. Either way, if the robots are down for 2 hours because of a mechanical failure, we're focused on that. We know we lost time, and we see the red cow list getting longer, and we get excited about that. we can also shut down the robots by leaving the bunk empty. And the cows know the bunk is empty and we're going to lie there and not get up. The barn's not going to move when feed isn't available. So I think we need to look at that both ways. The other thing that I saw as I started visiting farms and spending more time and getting there in the morning when the chores start is how we stack things together. One of the first farms I worked with had several things. That there was a wash first thing in the morning, and after the wash, it came out and fetched cows, and it was a barn that had to be scraped with a skid steer. So that followed, and then 3 days a week it was adding bedding, and then after that, feed was dumped, and each of those things alone was just fine. But when you stacked them all together, excuse me, there was about 4 hours when robots were not available to cows that wanted to come voluntarily. Robots were tied up with either cows doing other things or people doing things in the robots. And so we were able to break that up and break up that sequence of things. So how we do things in the barn, when we do things in the barn, having a big impact on when cows can come to the robot, getting the activities that we do, the things that have to happen to the systems like washes and getting all those things coordinated to make sure that robots are available to cows as much as possible.
Now, how do you help farms decide when to wash? Because I think that's a great point that you made. I've seen that with our farm that can make a big impact on the amount of visits that we have to our robots just on adjusting that time. So what would your recommendation, or what do you think is the best positioning of the day to do those?
First of all, I'm going to the low hanging fruit on that is to look at times when cows don't come to the robot anyway, and that's often between 2 and 4 a.m. when there's a limited activity in the barn. That's a good one to choose. It's also one that isn't necessarily popular with customers because the alarms are more likely to occur during washes than any other time of day, and so you'd like to put your washes at so that you minimize the alarms at times when you'd like to be sleeping. I also think that the number one thing that moves cows in the barn is delivering PMR, and so let's have the wash away from the time when the PMR is delivered so that when cows are up and about because they know PMR is coming soon, or when they finished eating, that a robot is available at those times. And then I think to keep in mind that everything we do is cyclical, and somebody will have something going on in the barn that forces cows to concentrate milking activity, say at 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever the case might be. When we send a bunch of cows to the robot through something that we did at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's going to happen again. And maybe it's 8 hours, it's going to vary but people will ask me, how come cows don't come to the robot in the afternoon? And they tend to be looking at something that happened in the afternoon as the cause. And it has nothing to do with what happened in the afternoon. It's something that was done either to break a cycle or create a cycle at another point in time.
So what are your thoughts on, I know you talked a little bit about stacking like in the morning, doing morning chores and trying to break that up. So you see it as a better idea to say if I've got to do 3 different sets of shots and pull blood samples to do pregnancy checks and do robot maintenance, do those all in one day a week, or try to do one of those every day throughout the week?
I think there's 2 sides to that. I heard a producer with one of the larger robotic dairies in Wisconsin talk about that when we lock cows up, if lockup is the way we're going to handle that, and I think that's a factor in that decision. If cows are going to be locked up, let's have everything in place and have the people ready and available so we do as many things as we can in that one lockup, but not to the point of extending that lockup time. So make the best use of the time that we have when we're disrupting the cows. I really like the use of sort pens as well for a lot of this activity, and that it allows the producer to focus on the cows that he needs and to work with them without having to disrupt the rest of the cows in the pen. I know that there are some that feel that I've disrupted that cow because I've taken her out of her. And so I like to see sort pens that allow cows to come back to the robot and be milked on their own schedule, even while we've separated them. But I think there's so much we can do with well-designed sort pens, not only to make it easier for ourselves to get those things done, and then it really doesn't matter which day. And I know there are farms that will not have a herd check day anymore, that each cow is preg checked when she is long enough. And by sorting the cows, and if the farm is large enough to have the people on farm to do those things, that, if you've got a vet coming to the farm, you want to make a efficient use of the vet's time and the vet's trips, because that costs money. But if you're doing some of these things in-house, or if you're maybe doing, for example, preg checks with a bioprint or something like that you can sort the cow on the day you need her and just work with that group of cows. Your sort pen doesn't need to be as big. And that block of time that you set aside for herd check doesn't need to be as big either. I think of farms I worked with as an AI technician, and people who were on a once a month preg check schedule. And, we could never go through that more frequently than once a month because it is so much work. And then the vet was on vacation and we had to do a 2-week, and they said, that goes so fast when we do it every 2 weeks.
Right.
Why? We're never going back to doing it once a month. And so I think this follows with being able to manage cows as individuals and small groups of cows that need something today by sorting them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that a lot of people going from a parlor to robots don't realize is how the cows change in how they interact with humans. Like for us, now I do most of my preg checking through bloods. I do all my vaccinations and stuff. I thought I have headlocks in all my barns, and I thought I was going to do all that through the headlocks. And we did at first. And then, you'd have the ones that didn't lock up or whatever, and then you'd go out and find them. And eventually, after probably a year of having the robots, the cows they're just doing their thing. And I'll go in and pull a blood sample while they're laying in a stall, or a lot of times, and find them that way, or do a shot just walking through the barn. Even if they're standing in the alley, they just can have a completely different demeanor over time that completely changed our management style of how we did those activities, where they're not as disruptive anymore as what they were when we were milking in a parlor and had to lock them all up for an hour to have the vet come out and look at them.
Yeah, and I think if your bunk management is where we want it to be in a robot barn, you're not going to get the level of lockup that you want. If I dump feed and all the cows come to the headlocks, well, I just shut the robots down, and so we don't want to have cows moving that way in the barn. I also think, going back to my AI technician days, that I agree that it works well for you and that cows are more calm than they used to be. And so from that standpoint, we can work with them in the stalls. I do put a caution with that if other people are working with your cows, the default should not be that we're going to go out in a stall and breed cows in stalls. It works. I'm not saying we can't do it. I'm just saying that from a safety standpoint, there needs to be another way to handle the cows as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, John, how does an individual farmer's goals play into how they should be managing their cows?
Well, I think this is one of the beauties of working with robots is that it can play to different management styles and different management goals. And as a consultant, this is the first thing I have to have a handle on. And I think that first farm that I mentioned, where we talked about all the chores stacked together, making robots unavailable to cows that wanted to come voluntarily. There were some family obligations there and some things that the customer wanted to be able to do with family. And we talked about, well, can you change your schedule in this way? And it's, no, this is the time that I'm getting kids off to school. And that doesn't make 5 pounds more milk per cow, but it does make the dairy operation functional. And it's part of why they're doing what they're doing. On the other hand, if top production is the goal, I think of a barn in Canada that I visited that's been featured in my newsletter, that just the bunk management was spot on, that he knew exactly what his refusals, what his dry matters were, what his intake was. Feed was delivered within half an hour every day. You looked at the cows in the stalls, and cows are either lying down or they're standing up eating or socializing, not the perching. And so cow comfort was right. I think my point was this was such a validating experience for me, because I've seen pieces of this on every farm. This farm does cow comfort right. This farm does bunk management right. This farm does transition management right. And in my newsletter, I've talked about the importance of things and how they work. But to visit this farm where all of these things came together and see how it works and just watch the cows respond to that was just, yeah, he's got this right, and it does work.
What, as you've been working with customers, what's been the biggest win that you've been able to help a farmer achieve so far that sticks in your mind?
I think it goes a little bit back to your previous question of what's a win. Mm-hmm. And I think back to before I was an independent consultant, I think we got to throw this one out there first, that I helped a customer through a startup, and it was a little bit of a rocky startup. They had some people leave before the robot started, ended up, they were doing a lot of construction themselves, and they ended up having to do a lot of milking themselves, and we milking the cows themselves. We really didn't even have access to the customer to help coach how the startup was going to go. We ended up working with the nutrition professionals more than anybody on coaching that. And so it wasn't the smoothest of startups. And a month after startup, I was back and, how are things going? And the win for them was, what? We got to spend a Saturday afternoon watching football. We spent another afternoon going sledding. We were able on Christmas Day to open presents. And so that's a win. And helping them through that. And that's not maybe so much a win that I created, and none of them are. It's always, I bring a little piece, and that piece has to fit. I think right out of the box, I worked with a herd where there were some settings, some feed settings, and some ways that feed tables were applied, which was limiting pellet intake in a free flow barn for fresh cows. And actually, they were in about 6 weeks before they really reached the level of pellet feeding. And this is a fun one to find when you're starting out, because it produced the problem is very clear. It produces results right away. So there's that kind of win. But I think in robotic milking, more often it's not one big win. And this is what's been rewarding about what I do, is so often we'll solve one problem and peeling back layers on an onion. And what other things didn't we see because of this problem? And so I think, maybe this is backing away from the question a little bit, but I think the biggest wins are over time when we solve one small problem, because you go into a farm that's making 85 pounds and you want to get them to 95. They didn't get to 85 with a bunch of holes. There's a lot of things already being done right. And in some cases, like the one I described, you'll jump in and boom, this is it, and this is what takes. More often, it's we solved this problem. We made some changes to milking permission and got the barn to flow better. In a guided flow barn, I'm thinking of one of the common problems that I saw was not allowing enough cows in the commitment pen at a time. And by opening that up and allowing, you'd think cows would wait longer, but what really happened is we were sending too many cows that should have been milked were being sent to feed because we weren't allowing enough cows in the commitment pen. And it ends up with more fetching, more disruption in the barn. And so we fixed that layer, and now the barn is flowing better. And now we peeled that one away, and we found 3 other things that milking permission and commitment pen population kind of work hand in hand. So the next step was how do we adjust milking permission to make sure that we're milking the right cows? And then we see, well, there's an opportunity for fresh cows to do more, or maybe in a guided flow barn, there's an opportunity to take some pellets away. And it's this progression. One of the things as I was planning my business was this concern that, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to find 3 problems and fix them, and they don't need me anymore. And I'm done, and I got to go find another set of customers. And that hasn't been the case because of this nature of robotic milking that, first of all, everything changes. And every time we have a forage change, it's changing how cows come to the robots and the relationship between what happens in the bunk and what happens in the robot. And so there's everything is always changing, and there's always a new opportunity. We need to make changes gradually, and we may need to make one change before we see the next opportunity.
I think that's sums up what my robot milking career has been so far. Is there's always something that can get changed, and like you said, you don't want to do them all at the same time. So I've been fascinated by it because you really see how interconnected everything is on a dairy farm and with a dairy cow when you milk with robots. I didn't see it near as well when I was milking in a parlor, and as I've been involved in other farms that milk with parlors. But it seems very much more pronounced in a robot dairy operation. And it's really fascinating to me to see that and see how everything's so interconnected.
And something that I've been able to see so much more clearly, and for you, operating a robotic dairy, you're immersed in it and you see these things. In my previous role as a corporate consultant, not spending enough time on farm to really appreciate that connection. And now working more closely with a group of customers, they've helped me so much to see how all those things are interconnected.
Yeah, you get to see that picture more over time, more clearly.
Yes.
So what are some words of advice that you'd have for any farm that's interested in potentially putting in box milking robots?
I think number one, and everybody has said this, and so I'm just maybe echoing what others have said, but it can't be overstressed. Visit a lot of farms. And this is a cool thing about the robotic milking community that I have found is they all want to work together, want to learn from each other, want to exchange information. And I also have found that they have time. I mean, yes, they're busy. You've got, you're a fine example where, no, you're not sitting out in the barn watching the robots, but yet at the same time, I have so many people have been willing to make time for me in this robot space. And so work with them, learn from them, look at lots of different barns, see what's worked for other people, see what fits for you and what will fit with your management goals. And then I think the next thing is to be realistic in your expectations and don't use I hesitate to say this. Maybe you're going to want to edit this out, Paul, but be careful with the numbers that the salesmen give you. I have visited farms that are planning, and their jaw kind of drops when I tell them that the average is 5,000 pounds per robot or less. And certainly it is possible to make 7,000 pounds on a robot. I've worked with farms and know people who do, but you can't budget those numbers. So be realistic in your expectations. We talk a lot about how many cows per robot, and that's going to depend on there's some
so many variables there.
So many variables. How what are your expectations in terms of production per cow? I've worked with herds that the goal is 75 cows per robot and 80 pounds per cow, and that is achievable. But your production per robot is still ending up in the same range, milking those lower producing cows less frequently. So. Be realistic in your expectations as you're planning the installation.
Yeah, I think those are great words of advice. And John, I appreciate you being here today on the podcast. Where can people find out more about what you're doing? And I know you'd mentioned a newsletter. You want to put a plug in for that again?
Sure. So I have a weekly newsletter that every Friday morning at 6 o'clock. I've got about over 200 subscribers now. Each newsletter includes an article that I've written myself on a robotic milking topic, usually something that's come up on my farm visits, and then something related that I've pulled from some other dairy periodical information. So you can subscribe to the newsletter. It is free, and all of the articles from the newsletter are archived on my website. So there's over 80 now. I have made the claim, arguably the most robust collection of information on robotic milking in the industry. So visit the website, and while you're there, there'll be a pop-up that you can subscribe to the newsletter. So you can access information about my company and subscribe to my newsletter at www.roboticmilking.co.
Great. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes as well. So again, John, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And very fascinating to talk about robotic milking. As always, I enjoy that topic. So thanks again for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode with John Gerbitz of Cow Corner Consulting, please share this episode with somebody that you know. That's how we grow our audience here at the AgCulture Podcast. We're very organic in how we grow. It's because of you guys, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for those that have done that in the past. Now, if you're interested in reaching out to John, there should be a link in our show notes that you can check out. And as always, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review of our podcast on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Also, check out our social media pages, see what's going on behind the scenes of every week on AgCulture Podcast. We do a lot of showcasing of the travels that I do around the world, as well as what our guests are up to outside of the episode that we had. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller, and thank you once again for listening to another great episode of the AgCulture Podcast. We will see you next week.